There are companies out there that will just adjudicate, and they're aware of that. If you've got a sloppy process, they will take advantage of that. There are con artists everywhere in this business, and people will play that game. You have to make sure that you're on point. You understand exactly what you're supposed to be doing. Directors, leaders, you need to make sure that your team have the systems and processes in place, but also they understand the consequences. Build relationships, build rapport. Most importantly, deliver. Be that contractor that they can't live without. If you're not performing on site, then don't expect to get paid. It's as simple as that. You're losing money and that's on you. If you haven't priced your job properly, you're not running your team properly, you are not entitled to make money on it.
Welcome to Taking the Con Out of Construction, the straight talking show that's changing the industry, one episode at a time. Small mistakes can cost big money and even more in time. But a small investment in listening to this episode could help you avoid disputes, delays, and costly pitfalls, while giving you the know-how to stop problems before they start. Let's turn complexity into clarity and take the con out of construction.
Welcome back to Taking the Con Out of Construction. And of course, Michelle, welcome back to your podcast, which is now well underway. In this episode, we're going to focus on applications for payment, what they are, why they're crucial, and how to avoid the common pitfalls that can cause delays or disputes. Perhaps it would be a good place to start, Michelle, by explaining to people like me why the industry refers to it as applications for payment rather than just getting paid or invoicing.
In the construction industry, most contracts will be under a JCT contract. There are a number of different ones. But within a JCT contract, you make an application for payment, which means you're applying for money. Whatever your contract term may be, you believe that you're entitled to X amount of money. So it could be, for an electrician, for example, you could have completed your first fix and you've got some materials on site or whatever it may be. So you'll go through of what has been completed, the application for payment. That then goes to the quantity surveyor of the client, generally, or the contract administrator or the client, whoever it may be, depending on the circumstances. But whoever is nominated in the contract to review that, they will have a look at that. Now, every contract is different, but generally, you have an application for payment. The person that's looking at the application has 7 days in order to look at it. Then they issue a payment certificate, and that's what they've agreed to out of that sum that has been paid. Now, where most people go wrong with an application for payment is actually where you're supposed to apply for is the due date. So, for example, easy figures, you've got the due date is the 30th of the month, right? So the due date would be the 30th of September. Therefore, your application for payment should be 7 days before the due date. So you should send your application for payment 7 days before. So the 23rd of September, you should have sent your application for payment. But actually, you should be applying for works that have been completed up to the due date. So what you should do is apply for the money and say, for example, the first fix was partway through, but it was going to be completed by the 30th. Then you apply for 100% of that. Now, the idea is the fact that it gives the time for the QS or whoever is certifying the application to have a look to see whether or not that's likely to happen, to check the materials on site. If they've got materials off site, to ensure the vesting certificates are there, whatever it may be, but to justify what they've got. And they then issue a certificate for payment. Now, there's also a mechanism within the contract, which is called a pay less notice. So even after you certified that amount, or if you have missed the certification day, but it's before the payment day, and the payment date will be, say, 7, 14 or 21 days, usually from the due date, you then have the ability to issue a pay less notice. So say, for example, they've issued a certificate, but the works didn't actually get completed, but the QS didn't realise the works hadn't been completed, that they valued up to the 30th until, say, the 7th. They've then got the opportunity, providing it's a 14-day payment, to issue a pay less notice and say, we are not paying you £20,000 because there's £5,000 worth of works weren't completed, or the materials that were supposed to be delivered on the 1st of the month or the 2nd of the month as per your application weren't delivered. And then you issue a pay less notice, and therefore the contractor knows how much they're getting paid. Once you've got a certificate, you can issue an invoice and then you can get paid. Now, some companies will do payment by certificate. You don't need to do an invoice, but I always recommend people to send an invoice in, because that's a legal point. That's when it becomes due. And then if it's not paid for whatever reason, you then have different regulations to go by, and interest can be added and all the rest of it from an invoice. You don't have the same rules with just something that's certified. So I always recommend people send an invoice once they've got an application. Now, where people go wrong, first of all, they send an invoice instead of an application for payment, which It's okay sometimes in smaller contracts, even though that's not the way it needs to be done, but it does cause complications, because if you're just sending an invoice and somebody doesn't agree that you've done those works, you've then got to issue credit notes and it gets a little bit more complicated. And also from a legal perspective, if you're chasing a payment of an invoice that hasn't been paid and your client has rejected that invoice, you can't then collect it as a debt unless you've dealt with that situation. So if someone sends you an invoice and then you reject it and you have valid reason for rejecting it, it causes you complications moving forward. So I always recommend that people follow this scenario, providing this is what your contract states, of course. Do an application for payment and then wait for your certificate. Now, if they haven't issued a certificate within the time frame within the contract, then you have every right to issue that invoice. They could then issue a pay less notice after that date, depending on the date you send the invoice. So what I always tell contractors is do your application for payment. Once a date has passed for them to issue a pay less notice, issue an invoice, they have to pay that. And if they do not pay that, you're entitled to adjudicate and they will have to pay that money. There are companies out there that will just adjudicate and they're aware of that. And if you've got a sloppy process, they will take advantage of that. They know that if you're not going to be issuing a pay less notice and you're not certifying and you're not on it, they will over certify and they will adjudicate. There are many of them out there. And as I've always said, there's two sides to every coin. So for every good contractor, there's a bad one. For every good client, there's a bad contractor, whatever. It's never all one-sided. There are con artists everywhere in this business and people will play that game. So you have to make sure that you're on point. You understand exactly what you're supposed to be doing. And directors, leaders, you need to make sure that your team have the systems and processes in place, but also they understand the consequences of not issuing those certificates. And because you've got the easier ways of adjudicating and you've got the minimal value and the speedier ones that are set at like £3,500, I believe it is, roughly, for these fast adjudications, because these are around, it's so easy. And if you get adjudicated on because you haven't paid an invoice or an application for payment, you haven't paid a sum, and you didn't issue a pay less notice, the adjudicator has nothing to go on. You can't defend it. Not only will you have to pay that immediately, but you'll also be responsible for the adjudicator's fees and any interest. And it's a really expensive lesson to learn. That's the importance of applications for payments. However, that's the basics of what needs to be done. Now, there are certain rules and there was other things that have been done over the past, say, 20 years that I'm aware of with applications for payment. So QSs often will do a payment on account. Now, there was this methodology that QSs would pay an account, 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 and then it comes to file an account and they wipe everything out. And I've personally had experience where clients have come to me and they've got £120,000 outstanding for their final account figure that's due to them. And that's not including retention. And then all of a sudden the QS says, no, this isn't being accepted, thrown it out, and dangle the carrot and say, I'll give you £60,000 now. I've seen it happen. I've spoken to many people that I've met after this has happened and they're like, oh my goodness, I wish I knew you 6 months ago. This is what they did. And I took it because I needed the cash. And it's not a one-off. I hear it all the time. I took it because I needed the cash because cash is king. So in these circumstances, it's actually illegal. There are a number of cases that have gone to court where people have tried to do this because we have a legal system that works under judicial precedent. Because that's happened before, you can no longer do that. Where you need to be, if you're a QS, this is what you need to do. If there's an issue that you are going to pay on account, you need to explain why you're paying on account. Now, that may be because you haven't got the information or you don't think the measurement is right or it hasn't been substantiated properly, because the burden of proof to substantiate you are owed money is on the contractor. So the person applying for the money, the person that owes the money, is their responsibility to prove to the client or the client's representative or the QS, whoever it may be, it's on them to prove that they are owed that money and why. So they haven't substantiated it. And I've done this before on numerous occasions. I would say, right, I'm going to pay an account. It's normally a variation. Sometimes it'd be contract works, and that's because I haven't got the evidence. So, for example, it may be the fact that when I've got to site, something's been covered up. So I'm asking for the evidence or I'm asking for something to substantiate because it didn't look like that to me or that wasn't quite right. Or if a variation has happened, but it hasn't been quoted before and agreed before, it's been instructed, but the cost wasn't agreed before, and then you come up with the cost and I was like, that doesn't seem quite right to me. I'll pay something because I know you've done it. I think a reasonable amount of money. And say, for example, they're claiming for 10 grand and I'm like, that seems a lot. I think it's only 7. I will pay 7 on account, awaiting substantiation. Now, I will give the contractor the reasons of why I need that substantiated. Now, if they don't give me that substantiation the following month, I will still put it on account, raise a point and say, I need this substantiating to give them a bit of a kick up the backside. Comes to month 3, depending on the length of the contract, and it may only be month 1, I will take that entire cost out because they haven't substantiated it. And that is sometimes how you get attention to people. Now, that's not necessarily the right thing to do, but when it comes to the point that they're not listening, giving me the information that I need to certify that, then I will take it out, because that's sometimes how you get the attention. Right or wrong, that's what happens. Now, obviously, as I've told you before, this podcast is about the naked truth. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily legal or the right thing to do, but that is what I have done in certain extreme circumstances, especially with variations, because what you need to understand as a contractor, if you've got a variation that you need more money for, if I'm the main contractor, or even you're a subcontractor and I'm a subcontractor, if I'm paying you and I have to pay you additional costs, I need to justify that to whoever's paying me. If I'm a subcontractor and I'm subbing out to you, or I'm the main contractor and I'm subbing out to you, if there's a variation and you're entitled to additional costs, it's highly likely that I'm entitled to additional costs. So if you're not going to give me the information I need, it's difficult for me to fight. But ultimately, if I've got the information that I need and I can then go to my client and substantiate it, and then not only do I get your costs, I'll get my markup or whatever it may be on top of that, my extension of time, my other costs associated with this variation, is so much easier. And also it gets the cash coming through. So that variation will be paid if I've got the information that I need to claim for it. And this is one of the things that contractors just don't understand until you explain to them. So a lot of the time it's like, fine, I'm paying you something, and there is situations where I will be paying for a variation that my company hasn't been paid for. A lot of people will come with an excuse, I'll pay you when we're paid. Oh, we haven't paid you because we haven't been paid. But that's illegal. Happens all the time. I can't pay you because I haven't been paid. That's not viable. So as a QS, I am ethically bound to certify something that somebody is entitled to. But it makes it very, very difficult when I don't have the information to get paid myself. One of the things that I would say to subcontractors is you need to make sure that you're getting your QS on side. And there are a number of ways of doing that, which I want to discuss in this podcast, and the reason that we've got our entire podcast on applications for payment. The first thing is subcontractors especially do not like filling out the information that a QS will send out from a main contractors. It's infuriating. And I'll tell you why it's infuriating. Because unless you're a nominated supplier or a nominated contractor, you are not going to be the only company that are going to be quoting for it, which obviously you don't give monkeys about. But people think it's a disadvantage. Now, I can understand that companies use different software. Some people use things like Bluebeam or Coins, or there's many, many different softwares out there that they'll put their drawings in and it will spit out a bill of quants. To then put that bill of quants into whatever the QS has produced, which is their scope of work, schedule of works, bill of quants, whatever document it's called as part of the tender process. What a QS has to do, then it doesn't matter what you do and what you don't do. The QS has to compare your price with the others. And the majority of the time, as a contractor's QS, I would have to get the contract documentation, the tender information. So you've got all the different subjects. And sometimes you can simplify it, just be subject headers. For example, it could be landscape, and it could be this, could be electrical, could be mechanical. As it goes out to each tender, you'll have a document, and then you'll be expected as a QS to put all the different prices from the 3, 5, 7, 10. I mean, 10 is extreme, but you're going to look at a minimum of 3. Most of the time it's between 5 and 7 contractors. And you have to compare them in one document that you have to then issue to your superiors or the client or somebody that turns around and says, yeah, okay, we're happy to go for that. Now, when you're doing a tender comparison, whether you're a contractor's QS or whether you're a PQS, doing a tender comparison is very difficult. The easiest way is when you've got somebody has completed your document in an Excel version and sent it back, and you can literally copy and paste it, and then you can do a comparison, and you can do like for likes, and you can put comments in it, and you can explain this company has priced this, and you can have a look and see where potentially somebody's either overpriced or underpriced something. If people haven't priced a particular element of works for whatever reason they might do, you then do a comparison and say, well, okay, only one company has priced this, but the others have priced that. Anyway, it gets into a situation where they can then do their job, because if not, if you don't price the document they've asked you to price, it does limit, because you've then got a human being transpiring your document into their document, because that's what they're going to have to do for their job in order for you to get the work in the first place. So this isn't relevant to applications for payment, but the chances are, and by all means speak to the QS, because every QS is different and they have their own methodology, but it's highly likely that document that was sent out to tender is part of a bigger document, is part of a bigger process. And your QS is going to have to transcribe your applications for payment into that document. So bear in mind, As a main contractor's QS, I could have up to 20 different contractors on site at one time. There could be 5, there could be 2, there could be 1, there could be up to 20. A lot of companies, especially if they've got funding, will make sure that in the contract, every single contractor needs to send their application in on the same day. So potentially on the 23rd of the month, I might get 20 applications for payment for one job. And if the contractors don't really think, that could not just be one job. I could have 5 all associated with the end of the month, which is the worst time to have an application for payment, by the way. Main contractors, don't do it. Don't have all your payments going out the same week as your payroll. It's madness. So as a QS, I could have 20 applications for payment. Yes, they'll be on the same project, but I might also have 3 or 4 other projects that I need to do. And I've got 7 days to review and certify, go to site, check. It could be a conversation with the project manager, whatever way they want to do it. We've got 7 days to certify 20 of them while you're still running a job, while you're still getting phone calls, while you're still ordering materials, while you're still having all these issues that you need to deal with, variations, phone calls, project management, meetings, goodness knows what else. It's a hell of a lot to do in a short amount of time. Now, rightly or wrongly, I'll tell you exactly what happens and the people that get paid first. I guarantee you, if you're applying for money, it's always a way rare for me to work for a main contractor that has the money to pay everybody every single month. It doesn't happen. So there are many situations where I've got £1.2 million worth of applications to certify and I've got £1 million to spend. So that means either someone isn't getting paid or everyone's getting reduced. I'm not saying it's right and I'm not saying it's legal, but that's the pressure that I'm under. There's no point in me certifying something that's not going to get paid. And even if I do certify it, I have no control over who actually gets paid. It's the finance director that has the final call, the directors. I have no control. I just do what I need to do. So when you've got that pressure, I'll have a finance director and the accounts department and whoever else breathing down my neck to get these certificates, and they want them ASAP because they've got all these different pots to fill. So you are under a lot of pressure, and likewise, you're filling in forms left, right, and centre. And there's so much documentation that goes with being a decent QS so that every department knows what's going on with the project and the business. People just don't understand what's involved in being a QS unless you are one, and being a good QS is different to being just a QS. So if I've got 20 applications for payment, the ones I'm going to look at are the easiest. The easiest application for payment for me to certify are the ones where they're in a format that I understand. Even the best thing is that they're in the format of the documentation that I sent out in the first place. I mean, that is incredible because it's literally a copy and paste exercise, that I have all the information I need. So as a consultant, I do have to turn up at site. But there are situations with interim valuations that if an application for payment has photos, vesting certificates, some form of a report that details what's on site. So when I'm working for a subcontractor and I've been their QS or I'm mentoring them, what I train their teams to do is do a site audit pro. Now, they're used to doing site audit pros because they do them all the time for their monthly reports internally. You can use the same site audit pro as part of your evaluations. You can go around and you can show pictures. So I'm looking at an application for payment, and not only have I got the percentages, I've got the backup of a picture of that work in place, or that piece of material in place, or that piece of machinery in place. I've got it there, it's right in front of me. Now, this serves 2 purposes for a subcontractor. First of all, there's no arguing that it's not there. So a QS, if they're a bit dodgy, or any company that's struggling financial, if you're proving that that work is there, you've sent that as part of your application, and they don't pay that, one, it strengthens your adjudication case and minimal time in preparing your adjudication because it's literally in your application for payment. The second thing is, if they do a payment on account for no valid reason, it's a bit of a black mark, so it protects you for looking forward to dispute. But 2, if you ever go to dispute, for example, if you've had reduced valuations consistently and then you're going to a final account and you're getting dispute, you can then go to the director or whoever decides they're not going to pay you. Look what I've done. On every single occasion, I've shown you the material on site, I've shown you the vesting certificate, I've shown you all these things. I've abided by the contract as per our terms and conditions and what we've agreed, and you failed to pay me for no valid reason. Courts do not like that, and that will go against them. and it will benefit you. But also, it's forward thinking. It puts you in a position that if you are in dispute at any point, you don't have to sit there training through photographic records. You don't have to sit there and get people to suddenly do things retrofit. You've got that information. And also, anybody looking at this information and receiving that information knows you mean business. And they know they're not the type of person because they know they're exposed. You will become a risk. You don't become a risk as in the building and they're not going to use you or not continue using you, because providing you're delivering like you're supposed to, they know, anyone with any savvy and anything about them in the industry will know, okay, this is a company, they're delivering on time, they're communicating, but also they're protecting themselves. This is not the kind of company that we aren't going to pay. It gets you on the top of that list of who's going to get paid. So you get paid before the money starts running out. And as much as it is a ball ache for some people and they don't like doing it, once they understand why and they get into that rhythm of doing it and the payment comes through and the cash comes through, it just makes life easier. Because if you're a subcontractor, you're a subcontractor, QS or project manager, whoever's doing these valuations, yes, it takes a bit more time, but actually it's not that difficult once you understand how. You've got a system and process in place. But ultimately, if you're getting your cash in and you're getting paid your valuations in full or reasonable, providing you're not overvaluing, because I never recommend you do that. There's no point in putting in a valuation for 100 grand because you're going to assume the QS is going to knock you 20 grand. It doesn't work, because the more you overvalue, the more annoyed the QS is going to get in the first place. It's also not great to have overvalued works you haven't done, because then you have issues with cash. But if you're valuing reasonably, you're delivering, you're providing the right information, there's no reason they can't pay you or they shouldn't pay you. And generally, that's when you do get paid. It's not the way it should be, but that is the way it is. So the other thing is, if you've got photographic evidence, if your QS is struggling, whether or not they've got 20 applications to be done at the same time or not, or they've got 5 jobs on, if they can value an interim application without going to site, you're much more likely to get your certificate. And once you've got your certificate, they don't have a valid reason to issue a pay less notice. They won't. So just to recap that, it's better to get your applications for payment in a format that's easy readable. I mean, I've had applications for payment, and if he's listening, he'll know it's him, that are so complicated because they're in different colours, and he's a decorator, so colours are his thing. And I look at them and I go, what the hell is that? Like, what is this? What does this colour mean? What does that colour mean? What does some? And part of it means it's halfway through, one's finished, one's paid, one's this, one's that. And I was like, it takes me half an hour to figure the thing out. And what you have to bear in mind, if it's complicated for me to figure out, I'm not going to look at it for another month. And then in a month's time, I've got to try and figure it out again, because it's not until you've looked at something like 7 or 8 months in a row, which not all contracts last that long, you will be at the end of the pile because you think, Jesus Christ, I haven't got time for that. I've got too many things on my plate. Let's get as many of these applications off my plate as I can. I'll deal with that again. And then all hell breaks loose, because that's what happens in construction 24/7. Then next minute, it's last minute, you're just issuing a pay less notice because you haven't had the time to value it because you're at the bottom of the pile. Make it easier for the QS. They're a human being. They might not have like it half the time, but they are a human being. You need to try and make their life easier, because you don't understand how complicated and complex it can be being a QS. Other things that people need to be aware of with the application for payment, and this is on both sides of the contract, pay less notices and certifications are paramount. The way that adjudication has gone, they are paramount. If you are not going to pay a contractor in full, as they've applied, you need to issue a pay less notice. Now, if you see an application for payment as a QS or client and you're totally happy with it and you think it's reasonable, you don't issue a pay less notice, they issue an invoice and you pay them that amount. That's not a problem. Not a problem at all. If you've received the application for payment, but you don't quite agree with it, but you haven't had an opportunity to issue a pay less notice, you have to pay them that amount. That's what they're entitled to. They are entitled to whatever they've applied for, whether they've done the work or not. They are entitled to what they've applied for if you haven't certified or issued a pay less notice. So if you've issued a certificate for payment and it's less than what they've certified, that in itself is like a pay less notice, because that's what you're going to be applying for. So in itself, it's a pay less notice. If you've issued a certificate of payment and then you don't want to pay that amount for whatever reason, because something has happened on site or something didn't turn up or they didn't do what they were supposed to be doing, that's when you issue a pay less notice. If you haven't done either of those, you do not pay the person or company on the payment day, you are opening yourself up to an adjudication, and it's shut and cut. You didn't do what you were supposed to do in the contract, unless your contract says something different, which is possible. But unless your contract says something different, that is it. You owe that money and you are entitled to intention, and they can take you to court and they can do whatever, they get CCJs, whatever. And even if they haven't picked up a tool and they're charging 100% of the work and they haven't even started on site, but you haven't issued a payless notice or a payment certificate or anything like that, you have to pay them that money and there is nothing you can do about it. So you have to make sure you've got these systems and processes in place to make sure that's done. The other thing about applications for payment is people that don't pay. So as much as we're talking about applications for payment, we're talking about payment in general. What to do if they don't apply. Now, what is likely to happen, especially going back to payments on account, someone does a payment on account and they ask you substantiation. There isn't a legal requirement once they've received the substantiation, depending on when they've seen it, to allow for that in the application for payment. So say, for example, I've seen an application for payment. It was received on the 23rd of the month. I've then had a look at it at the, 3rd of the month. It's not substantiated. I do a payment account. I'll send them an issue saying, this is a payment account because I haven't certified. They've certified. If you then send that information after they've certified, you don't have an entitlement for them to review. They do not have to review it if you haven't sent the substantiation in the first place. This is why if somebody sends you a payless notice because they're requiring substantiation, now if you have substantiated it, you have sent pictures, you have sent all the things you're supposed to do, you can reject it and say substantiation is here. And if they have had it substantiated, then they're not allowed to deduct it for no valid reason. But if you haven't substantiated it, and then they ask for substantiation, regardless of whether you issue it before the payment's made, they don't have to revise their payment certificate accordingly because you should have sent the substantiation in the first place. However, if you sent the substantiation this month, for example, and then next month they should pay that in full, unless obviously there's a reason that the substantiation isn't justified. This is why I recommend you send all the information in the first place. The other thing with applications for payment is making sure that your variation account is up to date and is justified and you're doing what you need to do in order to get things moving. Each contract will have a mechanism of how variation process goes, and I'm also going to talk about in the next podcast how to value variations moving forward. But make sure your variation account is obviously a part of it and it's part of your application for payment. The other thing that I need to make you aware of is speaking to QSs and accountancy departments. So if you're having problems getting paid and you're following all the advice I've already given, so you're getting them in on time, because if you don't get an application for payment in on time, then the process starts from the date you put the application in. If you put an application for payment in on the 27th of the month instead of the 23rd, then that's when your 7 days start. So don't expect to get payment on the same payment day if you haven't issued your information, because legally they don't know how to. Again, depends on the contract, and sometimes that can be amended out. So let's just say you have. One of the things that people struggle with the applications for payment is obviously understanding them. So get them so they're understandable, they're accurate, they're not overvalued, and they have all the information that you have. Now, if they've done all of that, you've got your payless notice or your payment certificate, you've raised your invoice, and they still haven't paid, there are ways of things you can do. Now, some people are intimidated about being contractual. I've spoken about contracts before. Having a contract, whether it's signed or not, or you've got a contract by action, you'll have a contract and you'll be covered at some point, either through the contract or through the Construction Act, either way, regarding applications for payments and payment being on time. If you haven't been paid on time, there's ways that you can deal with it. My advice is always to try and be amicable. So speak to whoever the provider is, whoever the company is, whoever's paying the bill, whether it be the accounts department, find out where the block is. Is it the QS? They haven't sent the information through. Is it the finance department if they're not got enough money? Get them and have a conversation with them. Become human for a start, rather than just being a number on a piece of paper. Try and add that human element to it because it's always good. Build relationships, build rapport. Most importantly, deliver. Be that contractor that they can't live without. Be that contractor that shows up on time, that delivers on time, that has a high quality, that is there at every meeting, that is accommodating. I'm not saying bend over backwards and do loads of freebies. What I'm saying is be accommodating, turn up at the meetings, understanding, be flexible when you can. I'm not saying do a whole heap of work for nothing, but be flexible. If you've priced your project properly in the first place, there should be a bit of room to maneuver about certain things and information. Be part of the team, be productive, be sociable, be nice, find out, ask about people's wives, kids, be that personality that you become part of the team that they cannot live without. Deliver on time. Make sure that your guys that are working and representing your company the way you want them to be, get them to be on time, get them to stay on site. If they're on day works, make sure they're doing day works and they're staying on site. They're not turning up at 9 o'clock and leaving at 3. Like, if you're charging for day works, make sure they're doing day works. Make sure you've got all the things that you need to do. Now, regarding applications for payment, I like to avoid day works because no one likes them. If you have to do day works, the reason that we have day works in a contract is because there are circumstances where you can't necessarily buy something. There are unknowns. You're on site, wasn't allowed for, wasn't aware of, and the only way to come across it is day works. I'm going to talk about day works a bit more in variations because they are a variation, but ultimately make sure you know your contract and what the terms and conditions are in regards to day works, and make sure you've got that information when you're sending an application for payment. So sometimes, an application for payment, it could be hundreds of pages. It could be something that enough information, you have to send it in 2 emails. Put a load of pictures on a PDF or whatever. Send them a link to a drive if that's the way. Applications for payment should be quite chunky documents, because they should have everything there. So it's like, here is everything substantiated, and give the QS nothing to argue about, especially if you've got a bit of a dodgy QS on the other side and you know for what they've got that reputation, or you've got a particularly hard contractor. Give them more information than they've asked for, more information than they need, and don't allow them the opportunity to not pay you. So day works, again, get signed day worksheets. I mean, avoid them if you can. And we're going to talk about this again, obviously, as I said in the variations episode, because there are ways to create your day works and why you should avoid them and how to price variations in a better way and avoid day works. But if that's the case, make sure you've got the signed sheets and it's all submitted. You've got everything you need to do. The other thing is, when you're doing an application for payment, I always recommend that people put not just the variations that have been instructed, but the potentials. And whether you know what the costs are, you can put a budget against them and say potential variations and budget, so that the QS always knows what's coming and there's no surprises. So they can do a CVR or some form of internal report to say, we've got potential variations coming, so there's no issue. So if they need more funding or they need to get more cash from somewhere, you give the company an opportunity to get that, rather than lastminute.com, all of a sudden they've got to find extra money. And kind of think of it as you would your own finances. I mean, how many times have people got a massive bill they won't explain it, and you just simply do that? And businesses are no different. Just because it's a business, you might be adding a few zeros, but it doesn't mean that people don't have the same response to unexpected payments. No one likes them. So give QSs or the team as much notice as you can. Give them the opportunity for them to find the money to pay you. Like, work on their behalf and work as a team. It's not an us and them thing. If you don't get paid, we will be discussing this in a bit more detail when it comes to disputes and things like that. But if you don't get paid your application on the payment day, you can chase automatically. I often have templates that I write for a lot of my clients as part of their systems and processes, and have a database of templates of documents. Sending a polite email or a document saying, we haven't received payment, this was due on this, that, and the other, you didn't issue a payless notice, therefore this payment is due, please make payment. Phone up someone and have a conversation with them. Why haven't we been paid? Now, ultimately, I always encourage the main contractors that I work with to be honest. If there's a problem with money, for whatever reason, they're not going to get paid, be honest with these guys and tell them up front. As a subcontractor, ask them to be honest with you and just say to them, talk to me. I've got other things. If you're not going to pay me, tell me now and give me the opportunity to find the money elsewhere or sort something out. Because bearing in mind, by the time a subcontractor has been paid, chances are he's been laying out money for 6 weeks before that. He's paid all his wages, he's paid all his materials, etc., depending on the lengthy payment terms. But sometimes he's well out of pocket by the time the money's due. So if you're not going to pay someone on time as a contractor, have the common decency to tell them they're not getting paid and when they're going to get paid. Because the worst thing you can do, and I absolutely hate it, is keep dangling carrots and just pretending, telling people they're going to get paid next week. Oh, we lost your invoice. Whatever bullshit they come up with, just be honest. People are much happier and easier to deal with things when they just have a bit of honesty. If I know I'm not getting paid tomorrow, tell me I'm not getting paid tomorrow. I won't promise other people money that I'm expecting tomorrow. I'll find something. Oh, I don't know, put something on a credit card, or I'll get a temporary loan. Give me the opportunity to continue to run my business without that money. Tell me it's not coming. Because telling me it's not going to come isn't going to change anything. But when it comes to the day that I'm desperate for it, and I've got people ringing me on the phone because they're expecting me to pay them, and I've got no money to pay them, just creates a whole horrible situation that's totally avoidable if people were just honest. Doesn't make it legal, doesn't make it right, but just be honest. Don't keep telling people they're getting paid and giving them bullshit, because these people are not stupid. They're not stupid, and it's not good for your business or your reputation either. Now, if this is the 7th time in a row you haven't got paid, by all means, go a bit stronger. You have to read up on the definitions, and you also have to have a look at your contract, of course. What you can do immediately after payment is due, send them a 7-day letter. You are going to withdraw from site if you don't receive payment in 7 days. When that 7 days comes, they don't pay, you take your guys off site. Gives you 7 days to reallocate them, potentially, or get a backup. If they haven't paid you within that 7 days, you take them off site. You do not return to site until they've paid in full. And in your 7-day letter, you advise them when you put off site that there will be additional costs to return to site, which you're entitled to claim and they need to pay, but also to explain that you will need a 7-day period to get back to site. So this company knows if they don't pay you, they're going to lose you for 2 weeks. That will get them to pay. The other thing is then obviously threatening them with court action. You can threaten them with court action, but there is a way to do it. You can get debt collectors, but if you get debt collectors, they will charge you a fee, which you won't get back. So you're going to lose a percentage of your profits. You can then issue them with a pre-action protocol letter for them to take them to court. You can adjudicate. There are a number of options. I would always recommend speaking to an ADR specialist, whether it be me or anyone else, another solicitor. But a lot of subcontractors go straight to a debt collector, and it's not always the best way to do it because you're losing money. There are other ways to do it. You just need to get a bit of advice. You can get a QS, for example, to write you some templates. You've got them ready to go. But again, it depends on the contract. Sometimes the terms will be different. The reason I sort of bark on a lot about the way that you do an application is if you are issuing an application on time and to the letter with all the information that I've already gone over, and it is as tight as anything. If you've got a company that consistently paying you less than you're applying for, even though you're substantiating everything, you haven't overvalued, and you've sent proof with a Site Audit Pro report or any other similar report, photos, evidence, receipts, vesting certificates, the whole shebang. If you are issuing a rock steady application for payment and they're still cutting your application down every single month, that is a massive red flag. So that is a red flag to the fact that they haven't got the money for a start for whatever reason. That could be because they didn't get the right funding. It could be because there's been variations elsewhere they didn't allow for. It could be because there's issues on site, or it could be the fact that it was never valued in the first place and the budget they had was much less than what they've contracted. These are flags that you're likely to get screwed at the back end. If you're consistently not getting paid on time, there is obviously issues there. And if you're consistently getting issues and speak to other people on site and other people aren't getting paid, these are the big red flags. Now, I think subcontractors generally are pretty quick on sussing those things out. But if you're a contractor or a client, you need to be aware that these people talk. So if you don't pay people for whatever reason, and it may be the fact that the subcontractor hasn't substantiated their money, they're not going to sit on site and go, yeah, well, actually, I didn't substantiate it properly and therefore I didn't get paid. No, they're going to slag you off. So you need to be careful and make sure that if you are deducting someone, that the contractor understands why. You also need to make sure that other people are being paid on time. If you've got a problem with one contractor, then make sure all the other contractors are getting paid on time. You need to understand that your impact of not paying people on time, not communicating with them, not picking up the phone, not being interactive about payments will cause you massive issues on site. And the issues that they will cause to you on site is, one, people will get nervous, which means the program will shut down because they don't want to spend their money and lose money they're not going to get paid for. You won't get people doing variations. People start to get hostile and it affects the overall morale on site, which reduces program, reduces costs, and people start getting very, very antsy. So what you need to do is be human. If you've got problems, explain them, but sort them out. Make sure that your project is governed in the right way. Make sure it's set up in the right way. Make sure it's priced the right way. Make sure you've got the money allocated. By just screwing the subcontractor is not going to help you in the long run, because you'll get reduced quality, you'll burn bridges, you won't have the same relationship with them. So therefore, just picking up the phone and being honest to someone and saying, I'm really sorry. Even though a part payment is better than nothing, but avoiding the fact that you cannot pay someone is the worst thing that you can do, because it just makes everything worse and it will just ripple through your site. So just to recap, make sure your applications are rock solid, so they've got all the information that you need to substantiate your claim and what you're claiming for. Don't over-egg. Make sure you're providing, because if you're not supplying what you're supposed to be doing, if you're not performing on site, then don't expect to get paid. It's as simple as that. You're losing money and that's on you. If you haven't priced your job properly, you're not running your team properly, and you're not entitled to make money on it. So be prepared and obviously be honest with yourselves. If you're not getting paid, also look at yourselves. Are you performing? Because that's the first question. If you are, then obviously it's a slightly different thing. So make sure you're performing. Make sure you've given them all the things they know. Make sure you know your contract and you know what the processes are. And if you do that and get the people on board and be human and turn up and have conversations and check in with people and don't just hound all the time, understand the other side of it and be appreciative and supportive, then there is no reason why they can't pay you. And if they don't, you've then got all the information you need to quickly glitch an adjudication and get your money.
Great advice. And like you've mentioned, in our next episode, we're going to be addressing variations, and Michelle will share her experience and advice to help you stay ahead. Michelle, as always, thank you so much for giving such a comprehensive breakdown of the process, helping everyone understand how to approach applications with confidence and get paid on time.
If you found value in today's episode, hit subscribe so you never miss a new release, and share it with someone in the industry who needs to hear it. To learn more, access resources, or find out how Michelle Carr and Construction Alchemy can help you protect your projects, solve problems, and boost your profits, visit constructionalchemy.co.uk. Together, we can change the industry, one project, one company, and one episode at a time. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are based on the personal experiences of Michelle Carr and her guests. They are for general information only and should not be relied upon as professional or legal advice. Always seek your own independent advice before making decisions. Neither Michelle Carr nor Construction Alchemy accepts liability for any loss, damage, or consequences arising from actions taken based on this podcast. Thank you for listening.